Now, let's talk about why we're here. And I'd like to introduce a term, a definition, collaborative mobility, which will be our focus. And I suppose we can interchange that with on-demand mobility as well. And this is an economic model where the crowd shares ownership, funding, and access to mobility assets. You see these cars right here, the BMW Drive Now cars? Anybody can rent those in the available cities. You don't have to own a BMW to access one now. That's a significant and seemingly scary business model change for any corporation to move into. Let me share some stats about how large this space is. I just put this together about a week ago, so it's very accurate. Etsy is a 10-year-old company that enables makers to share their own goods. They have 19 million active shoppers, and they don't own a single factory, warehouse, or showroom, and they IPO'd last month for $3 billion US. Lending Club enables people to share money with each other instead of going to a bank. It's peer-to-peer money sharing loans, and they are worth $7 billion. They don't own a single branch, bank, or ATM. Airbnb, they're only 7 years old. They've had 23 million guests last year. They don't own a single bed, bath, or bar. Wyndham Hotels, market cap is $7 billion. Hyatt Hotels, market cap is $9 billion. Airbnb's market value is $25 billion. And Uber, 140 million rides last year. They don't own a single car, taxi, or town car. They're valued at $40 billion and have raised over $5 billion. PricewaterhouseCoopers says that the revenues being generated in this market equate to $15 billion in revenue this year. In 10 years from now, they forecast it'll be over $300 billion. Look at this, young startups, high transaction, low ownership of assets, low capital expenditures, high valuation. That's very different than the traditional industrial revolution. These startups are being just developed on apps. It's a very different economy. Here's some data on millennials in the United States on how they like to share. Really interesting stats. 1 in 3 are interested in renting or his or her belongings in a way that generates more money. And we will hear from the CEO of Peerby on that model later. 56% of these millennials are open to sharing rides with each other. And then also, the number one thing they're willing to share is books. The second most thing they're willing to share is cars. That's our future generation. They're open to sharing the physical world with each other, and they're going to eventually move up into the rest of the workforce. So some quick stats. These startups in this space have been funded a tremendous amount of money. Social networks like Facebook, Zing, YouTube have been funded around $6 billion. But this market, in a much shorter period of time, has been funded $14 billion. It means these startups are not going away in any time soon. Now, let's bring this to life. And I like to be your tour guide, not just for the evening, but I like to tour you through this industry. And all of you have next to you the honeycomb diagram. Could you please grab that? Now, why is a honeycomb such an interesting geometric structure? Did you know there's a honeycomb in the i3? This carbon fiber chassis has a honeycomb structure in part of it. And the reason why, it's very efficient and resilient. You can put a lot of weight on a honeycomb structure, and it's very efficient. There's low waste of space, and you don't have to fill it with all these materials. And it's a wonderful metaphor for how people are also being very efficient and resilient in this new economy. And I'd like to tour you through about 7 of these hexes. We don't have time for all 12. Now, in the center of these hexes is a new class of individuals. And whatever you do, don't call them consumers. They're not consumers. They're not buying things in the traditional way. Instead, they're turning their homes into hotels, their cars into taxis. They're acting like investors in crowdfunding Greece to get out of their deficit. That's actually happening on Indiegogo this week. The people are crowdfunding Greece to get out of debt.